And now a reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Glory to you, O Lord. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." So Jesus went with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years, and she had endured much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowds, and touched his cloak. And she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I know I will be made well." Immediately, her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see this crowd pressing in on you? How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" Jesus looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, and fell down before Jesus and told him the whole truth. Jesus said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble this teacher any further?" But overhearing what they had said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except for Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When Jesus entered, he said to them, "Why do you make commotion and weep? This child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at Jesus. Then Jesus put them all outside, and took the child's father and mother, and those who were with him, and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk. She was about 12 years old. And at this they were overcome with amazement. Jesus strictly ordered them that no one should know this, and told them to give the little girl something to eat. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. It's probably no secret to you that I spent a good portion of my college years working as a camp counselor. But one of the jobs I got later on, in my end of my last year in seminary, just before I took my first real job as a pastor, was working for the seminary as an ambassador to church camps. A part of this job was traveling around to about 7 different camps across the United States, all doing essentially the same thing. They were holding week-long church camps for kids anywhere from, first or second grade all the way up through high school. And this was a really fun job because I got to jump into the very middle of summer somewhere in the United States, somewhere out in a beautiful camp, sometimes by the sea, sometimes in the mountains, sometimes just out in the woods somewhere. And it was really fun because I'd had all this experience myself with church camps, and really, there's not a ton of difference depending on where you are in the country in terms of how camp looks and how it works. We all sing a lot of the same songs, we all do a lot of the same skits, we all know a lot of the same stories and games, and so just about anywhere I went, I could plug right in. Immediately, as things started happening, I knew what was going on. I could sing all of the songs, I could jump in and play any part in any skit they might have planned. It was like we spoke a common language. It was like camp just was this one singular thing, no matter where you were in the world. It all kind of worked the same way. And there was something really fun about that until I got to the last camp I was assigned to go and visit. Now, this camp was just a little bit different. It was a family camp. And so instead of a bunch of kids coming and being with their counselors the whole week, whole families would come, sometimes with very young children, and the families would kind of do camp together with the counselors and things. But it seemed, at least on the surface, like the same idea. You know, you still have all of your same songs and prayers and routines and skits, and I was ready just to jump right in. And I got to this camp, it was on the shores of Lake Erie in Ohio, and was diving right in, and we got into a mealtime, and I'm ready to go, and I think I know exactly what's going to happen, and all of a sudden, this different kind of chant starts erupting around the room. And people are playing different parts, and the leading of who is doing this chant seems to pass around the room somewhat at random, and I'm trying to jump in at any point when I think I know what's going on, and every single time I do, I get it wrong. Well, it's just one meal, so things keep going on, and really over the next couple of days, every time I think I know what's about to happen, every time I think I know what a skit is going to be, or how a song is going to go, or what kind of prayer or chapel is going to look like, I jump in and I'm wrong. Well, later on in that week, I learned that this family camp has been doing something kind of different for a while. Most of the families that come and attend come on the very same week every single summer. And many of these families that were there this week had been coming for more than 30 years. And so while about 30 years ago, things ran very similarly to all the other camps that I've been used to, as each week in the year goes by, every time this group gets together, they start tweaking things. They start changing things. They came up with their own way of doing camp, their own rituals, their own games, and every single one of them was completely new to me. And there was a time when I was kind of frustrated with this. I wanted to be that person who just knew what was going on. I wanted to be able to jump in like I did everywhere else and have it all figured out. But each and every time I did, I was wrong. I had to learn something new. I had to change my expectations about what camp looked like, about how all of these songs and games and things worked. And by the end of this week, I stopped trying to figure it out and just went along for the ride and had a fantastic time. But there was something about that idea that, you know, in my head, I knew how things worked, and I'd get ready to jump in, and every single time it would be wrong. I feel like that might be how the crowd in Jesus' story felt in this gospel lesson. You see, Jesus is no stranger to crowds. Crowds come around and they follow Jesus from place to place, and the crowds always seem to have this kind of preconceived notion about what Jesus is doing. Maybe they've, experienced this before. This is before, cable and the internet. And so if you want to have entertainment, you have to wait for somebody to come into town, and they follow them around and see what they're going to do. And so the crowd seems to think that, Jesus is clearly a healer, so we're going to take him somewhere where there's somebody to heal. And probably Jesus is going to do a big song and dance routine. He might grind up some herbs or some things and see if this girl gets any better. That's going to be the big entertainment, the big thing for the week. Let's see if this healer can do anything. But almost right from the get-go, Jesus changes the script. Jesus doesn't do what all of the other healers do. In fact, right from the beginning, all of a sudden, he goes off script, says, "Somebody touched me." This isn't what normally happens. All of a sudden, there's this woman coming up. She was healed without Jesus doing seemingly anything. And she wasn't the right person to be healed. She wasn't the one that was picked out ahead of time for this healer to come and go to. The crowd had all of these expectations, and Jesus flips the script on them. He changes things. He shows them that God doesn't work exactly the way they think God does. That God shows up in the unexpected places. Again, later in the story, Jesus is coming to heal this man's daughter, and the crowd says, oh, wait, never mind. Unfortunately, the daughter's already dead, and so there's nothing you can do. The crowd has these expectations. The crowd says, well, God can do this, and this, but not that. God isn't the one who can bring someone back from the dead. It's not something a healer can do, and so let's not waste any more time. We've had our fun. Let's all just go home. But Jesus is about changing those expectations. Jesus is about showing the world that God shows up in the places we never expect. That God goes to work in the moments that we think God is missing from our lives. That God goes to work again and again in all of those people and places we never thought God could be. Jesus changes the script on this crowd once again. He goes in and he picks up this little girl and brings life. That's what Jesus is about. Jesus is about taking those assumptions that we all have about who God is, about where God works, about how God is in the world, and flipping them upside down. That can be kind of uncomfortable sometimes, if we're honest. There's something nice about kind of knowing what's going to happen, about knowing, at least in our minds, the way God is supposed to work in the world and seeing things go that way. We all like it when we have the world kind of figured out, when we can come into a place and start singing the same song that everyone else is doing and just know that we're all on the same page, that there's nothing that's going to surprise us. But Jesus is all about these kinds of surprises. Jesus is all about finding those assumptions that we have about where God is and where God is not, and flipping them upside down each and every time. Jesus is here in this world to show us that God is all around us, that there's no place where God isn't. Jesus comes into this world and shows us that God is present in the midst of mental illness, that God is here in the midst of suicide and death and all of the horribleness that happens around us in the world. All those times in our lives when we think God has abandoned us, that God has disappeared into this world, Jesus comes into those moments. As challenging and as difficult and as soul-crushing as they might be, Jesus still finds a way to show up. Not in the ways we expect, not usually in the people or the places we expect. But again and again, God shows up. Jesus brings God into this world, challenging all of our assumptions about who God is, about who God works through, about where God is in this world, about what God can do. And again, Jesus flips the scripts and changes our lives in ways we can barely describe. It's not always comfortable, it's not easy, but when we learn to let those assumptions go, when we learn to see God working in our lives in the places we never imagined, something happens inside of us. We're transformed, we're changed, we see the world in a new way. We see the world just a little bit closer to the way God sees the world. It's not easy. It's not comfortable. Many times we would rather just have God work the way we think God should work and have the world be a lot simpler that way. But Jesus shows us that's almost never how things go. God shows up again and again in the ways and places we never expect. But those moments change our lives. They change our hearts, and they help us to see one another in a new way. Wherever you are this day, whatever is happening or has happened in your life, wherever you feel that God is or God isn't in this world, I hope and pray that you can find that little glimpse, that glimpse of Jesus coming in and flipping the script and changing the way we all see one another. May God bless you this day. May you see Jesus' face in a place you never expected. And may none of us ever be the same again, because there is no place where God isn't.